The funeral director's voice cut across the cemetery like a blade. "Sir, I need you to leave immediately. You are disturbing the mourners." The old man behind the oak tree did not move. His eyes, sunken and red-rimmed from 3 days without sleep, stayed fixed on the flag-draped casket 30 meters away. His clothes were torn. His boots were held together with electrical tape. His face was covered in gray stubble and grime from 47 miles of walking. But what Gerald Ashworth did not know, what no one at that funeral knew yet, was that the man in that casket had spent the last 8 years of his life searching for the vagrant he was trying to remove. And in exactly 23 minutes, Gerald Ashworth would be begging for forgiveness on his knees. The October wind carried the scent of fresh-turned earth across the military section of Eternal Rest Veterans Memorial Cemetery. White headstones stood in perfect rows across rolling hills, American flags snapping at each grave. Beneath a white canopy tent, folding chairs held mourners in black. 7 soldiers in dress uniforms stood at rigid attention, rifles at their sides, waiting to deliver the 21-gun salute. A chaplain's voice drifted across the grass, speaking words of comfort that the old man could not quite hear from his position behind the massive oak. He had walked for 2 days to stand behind this tree. He had not eaten in 36 hours. He had not slept since he saw the name on the bulletin board at the VA hospital in Louisville. Corporal First Class Elias Valdez. Killed in action. Syria. Classified operation. Services to be held at Eternal Rest Veterans Memorial Cemetery, Fort Campbell, Kentucky. His son. His boy. The child he had taught to tie his first knot at age 4. The young man he had abandoned 6 years ago with nothing but a note that said, "I love you, and I am sorry, and live your life, and do not look for me." Gerald Ashworth straightened his perfectly pressed black suit and took 3 deliberate steps closer to the vagrant. The funeral director had built his reputation on dignity, on decorum, on ensuring that families experienced their grief in an environment of absolute respect. A homeless man lurking behind a tree threatened everything he had spent 30 years cultivating. "Sir," Ashworth said, his voice carrying just loud enough for the nearest mourners to hear, "this is a private military funeral. It is not a spectacle for transients. I'm going to have to insist that you leave the premises immediately." The old man's voice came out as barely a whisper, hoarse from disuse and grief. "Please, I just want to watch. I will not come any closer. I will not disturb anyone. Please." Ashworth's lip curled slightly. The please only confirmed what he already knew. This was a vagrant, probably mentally ill, probably drawn by the flags and the uniforms and whatever delusion his broken mind had constructed. The funeral director had seen this before. They wandered on cemetery grounds, claimed to be veterans, claimed to know the deceased, claimed whatever they needed to claim to justify their presence in a place where they did not belong. "Sir, I understand that you may be confused," Ashworth said, his tone shifting to the practiced sympathy he used for difficult situations. "But this ceremony is for the family and friends of a genuine American hero, a soldier who gave his life for this country. I cannot allow his memory to be tarnished by your presence here." The old man's hand moved to his chest, touching something beneath the threadbare olive field jacket held together with safety pins. His fingers pressed against the fabric, against whatever lay beneath, and his eyes never left the casket. "I knew him," the old man said. His voice cracked on the words. "I knew him before he was a soldier." Ashworth sighed. "Of course you did. They always did. Every vagrant who wandered onto these grounds had a story, a connection, a reason why the rules should not apply to them." He pulled out his phone and began typing a message to cemetery security. "If you're watching from anywhere in the world right now, we would love to know where you're joining us from. Drop a comment below with your city or country." Stories like this, one, remind us that the people we pass every day might be carrying burdens we cannot begin to imagine. If these stories of hidden heroes speak to you, consider subscribing to hear more. Now, let us continue. A mourner near the back of the tent had turned to watch the confrontation. Then another. The chaplain's voice faltered slightly before continuing, but the attention of the gathered crowd was beginning to drift toward the oak tree and the 2 men standing beneath it. Ashworth lowered his voice, but not enough. Sir, I am giving you one final opportunity to leave with dignity before I have security remove you. This is a funeral for a war hero, not a shelter line, not a place for people like you. The old man did not flinch at the insult. He simply stood there, his hands still pressed to his chest, his eyes still locked on the flag-draped casket. There was something in his stillness that did not match his appearance. Something in the way he held himself, even in his ragged clothes, that suggested a different kind of man beneath the grime and the grief. His posture, Ashworth would later realize, had been perfect. His feet had been positioned exactly shoulder-width apart. His shoulders, despite the exhaustion carved into every line of his face, had been squared. When he had turned to face Ashworth, he had pivoted on his heel with an economy of motion that seemed entirely out of place for a homeless vagrant. But Gerald Ashworth did not notice these things. He noticed only the torn jacket, the taped boots, the unwashed face, and the smell of a man who had been walking for 2 days without rest. Security is on the way, Ashworth announced, loud enough for the mourners to hear. I apologize for this disruption. It will be handled momentarily. The old man's voice dropped even lower, so quiet that Ashworth had to lean in to hear it. His name was Elias. He had a birthmark on his left shoulder, shaped like a crescent moon. When he was 10 years old, he caught his first fish and cried because he did not want to hurt it. He wanted to be an astronaut until he was 12, and then he wanted to be a soldier. He wanted to be like his father. Ashworth blinked. The details were specific. Too specific for a random vagrant's delusion. But that only meant this man was a more sophisticated liar than most. I do not know where you obtained that information, Ashworth said slowly, but it does not change anything. You need to leave. A security guard was walking toward them now, a heavy man in a black uniform with a badge that read Eternal Rest Memorial Services. Behind him, another figure was moving. A soldier in dress uniform, young and sharp-faced, breaking from his position with the honor guard. Sergeant First Class Cole Driscoll had been watching the confrontation from his post. He had seen homeless men claim to be veterans before. He had seen them wear stolen jackets and carry fake medals and demand respect they had not earned. His father had been a veteran. His grandfather had been a veteran. He had spent his entire career in administrative roles, never deployed, but he wore his uniform with aggressive pride, and he did not tolerate those who disgraced it. The old man turned slightly as Driscoll approached, and for just a moment, something shifted in his bearing. The homeless vagrant disappeared. Something else took its place. Something that made Driscoll hesitate for half a step before his contempt overcame his instincts. That field jacket, Driscoll said, pointing at the threadbare olive fabric. Where did you get it? The old man's answer was quiet but immediate. Fort Bragg, 1978. Driscoll's laugh was sharp and dismissive. Right? And I am a sergeant major of the Army. He turned to Ashworth. I will handle this, sir. This man is clearly suffering from some kind of delusion. Probably stole that jacket from an actual veteran. The security guard arrived, breathing heavily from the walk across the grounds. Both men positioned themselves on either side of the old man, ready to escort him away. The old man did not resist. He did not argue. He simply looked past them, past the security guard and the funeral director and the young sergeant, toward the flag-draped casket where his son lay waiting to be lowered into the earth. His hand was still pressed to his chest. Beneath the fabric, beneath his palm, 2 sets of dog tags hung on a single chain. One set was his own, worn smooth by 24 years of service in places that did not exist on any map. The other set had been his son's first pair, issued the day Elias enlisted, kept in Raymond's pocket for 6 years as the only connection to the child he had abandoned. The security guard took his arm. The old man let himself be turned, let himself be guided away from the tree. But as he walked, as they led him toward the parking lot and away from his son's funeral, he did not look at the men holding him. He looked at the casket. He looked at the flag. He looked at the place where Elias would spend eternity without ever knowing that his father had come. And in his chest, beneath the grime and the grief and the years of hiding, Raymond Valdez felt something break. He had taught that boy to tie his first knot. He had held him when he cried over a fish he did not want to hurt. He had left him with nothing but a note and 6 years of silence. And now Elias was dead, and they were dragging his father away from the funeral like a stray dog wandered in from the street. But what Gerald Ashworth did not know, what Sergeant First Class Cole Driscoll did not know, what the security guard and the mourners and the chaplain did not know, was that the vagrant they were removing had trained the man in that casket to tie his first knot, had taught him to shoot, to track, to survive, had watched from the shadows as Elias graduated from basic training, from airborne school, from the Special Forces qualification course. And in exactly 19 minutes, when the truth finally came out, every person at that funeral would understand exactly what they had done. They marched him 15 meters toward the parking lot before Raymond Valdez stopped walking. His feet simply planted themselves on the grass and refused to move further. The security guard tugged at his arm. Sergeant Driscoll barked something about cooperation and consequences. But Raymond was not listening to them anymore. He was listening to a memory. "Daddy, why do you have to go away so much?" Elias had been 6 years old when he asked that question. They had been sitting on the back porch of their small house outside Fort Bragg, watching fireflies drift across the yard like tiny wandering stars. Sophia had been inside making dinner, and the smell of her garlic chicken had drifted through the screen door, and Raymond had looked at his son and felt his heart crack down the middle. Because there are people who need help, Raymond had said, and Daddy is one of the people who helps them. But I need you too. Raymond had pulled his son onto his lap and held him so tight that Elias had squirmed and laughed and complained that he could not breathe. And Raymond had whispered into his hair, "I will always come back. I promise. I will always come back to you." He had kept that promise for 22 years, through operations in places whose names were redacted from every official record, through firefights and ambushes and extractions that went wrong in every possible way. Through months of separation and classified briefings and lies, he told his family to protect them from the truth of what he did. He had always come back, until Sophia got sick. The security guard was saying something about police and trespassing charges. Raymond did not hear him. He was standing in a hospital room 8 years ago, holding his wife's hand as the monitors beeped their steady countdown toward silence. He had been in Yemen when she was diagnosed. He had been at a classified location he could not name when she started chemotherapy. He had been debriefing at Fort Bragg when she took her last breath, and Elias had been the one holding her hand, and Raymond had arrived 6 hours too late to say goodbye. She had asked for him at the end. Elias told him that later, his voice flat and hollow with grief and something else. Something that looked like accusation. "She kept asking where you were, Dad. She kept saying your name." Raymond had looked at his son, 20 years old and shattered by loss, and he had seen Sophia's eyes staring back at him. The same dark brown, the same shape, the same way they crinkled at the corners when she smiled, except Elias was not smiling. Elias was looking at his father like he was seeing him clearly for the first time. "Where were you, Dad? Were you really?" And Raymond could not answer. He could not tell his son about the extraction that had gone wrong, about the 3 days of evading enemy patrols through mountain terrain, about the sat phone that had been destroyed in the initial ambush. He could not explain why he had chosen the mission over his wife's final days. He could not explain it because he did not understand it himself. So he had run. He had written the note in the middle of the night, his hand shaking so badly that the words were barely legible. "I love you. I am sorry. Live your life. Do not look for me." He had placed on the kitchen table next to the coffee maker Elias used every morning. And then Raymond Valdez, Command Sergeant Major, 24 years of service with the most elite special operations unit in the United States military, had walked out the back door and disappeared. He had told himself it was for Elias's protection. He had told himself that his son was better off without a father who chose missions over family. He had told himself that the guilt eating him alive would only poison everything it touched, and Elias deserved better than to watch his father drown in it. But the truth was simpler than that. The truth was that Raymond could not look at his son without seeing Sophia's eyes, without seeing the accusation in them. Without hearing the question he could not answer. "Where were you, Dad?" 6 years. 6 years of sleeping under bridges and in shelters and in the woods behind rest stops. 6 years of watching from the shadows as Elias graduated from basic training. 6 years of learning through veteran networks that his son had joined special forces, had deployed twice, had earned commendations that made Raymond's chest ache with pride he had no right to feel. Elias had been searching for him the entire time. Raymond knew this because he had made it his business to know. He had tracked his son's career the same way he had once tracked high-value targets. From a distance, without being seen, without making contact, he had told himself he was protecting Elias. But the truth was that he was hiding from the look he knew he would see in his son's eyes. The same look from that hospital room. "Where were you, Dad?" And now Elias was dead. The security guard yanked his arm again, harder this time. "Sir, you need to come with us now. The police are on their way." Raymond turned his head slowly and looked at the man holding him. Really looked at him. And something in Raymond's gaze made the security guard take a half step back without meaning to. "I walked 47 miles to be here," Raymond said. His voice was quiet, but there was something beneath the hoarseness now. Something cold and steady. "I have not slept in 3 days. I have not eaten since yesterday morning. I walked through the night to reach this place before they put him in the ground." The security guard recovered his composure. "Sir, I do not care if you walk from California. You're not authorized to be here, and you need to leave." Sergeant Driscoll positioned himself directly in front of Raymond, blocking his view of the funeral. "Listen to me carefully. I do not know what kind of delusion you're operating under, but this is a funeral for a Special Forces soldier. A real hero, not some vagrant's fantasy." Raymond's hand moved to his chest again, pressing against the dog tags hidden beneath his jacket. "I know exactly what kind of soldier he was." Driscoll's eyes narrowed. "Yeah, sure you do." He turned to the security guard. "Get him out of here. I need to get back to my post." But as the security guard reached for Raymond's arm again, Raymond did something he had not done in 6 years. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a photograph. It was worn soft at the edges, the colors faded from years of being touched and folded and pressed against his heart. A boy of 10 stood at the edge of a lake, holding a fishing rod in one hand and a small bass in the other. His smile was enormous, but his eyes were wet with tears because he had not wanted to hurt the fish. Behind him, slightly out of focus, a younger Raymond Valdez stood with his hand on his son's shoulder. "This is Elias," Raymond said. He showed the photograph to Driscoll, then to the security guard, then to Gerald Ashworth, who had followed them toward the parking lot. "This is my son." Driscoll barely glanced at the image. Could have gotten that anywhere. Probably stole it from the actual family. Raymond's jaw tightened, but his voice remained steady. "The birthmark on his left shoulder is shaped like a crescent moon. His mother used to say it meant he was destined to explore the stars. He wanted to be an astronaut until he was 12. Then he wanted to be a soldier. He wanted to be like me." Ashworth and Driscoll exchanged glances. The details were specific. Too specific. But Driscoll shook his head. "Probably researched the family. These stolen valor types do that. They study the people they are pretending to know." Raymond looked past them, toward the funeral tent, toward the casket, toward the flag that would soon be folded and handed to someone who was not him. "He spent 8 years looking for me," Raymond said, and his voice finally broke. "He never stopped. I know because I was watching. I was always watching, and I never let him find me because I was too ashamed of what I had become, too ashamed of leaving, too ashamed of the father I was." His knees buckled slightly, and for a moment it seemed like he might collapse right there on the cemetery grass. The security guard instinctively reached out to steady him, then caught himself and stepped back. Raymond's eyes were wet now, tears cutting tracks through the grime on his face. "I left him a note that said, 'Do not look for me.' And he looked anyway. For 8 years. And now he is dead, and I never got to tell him I was sorry. I never got to tell him I was watching. I never got to tell him I was proud." He looked directly at Driscoll. "I'm not asking to sit with the family. I'm not asking for anyone to acknowledge me. I'm just asking to watch my son be buried. From behind a tree, 30 meters away. Please." The word hung in the air between them. Driscoll hesitated. For just a moment, something flickered in his expression. Something that might have been doubt. Then he hardened again. I have heard every story in the book, every excuse, every lie. He stepped closer to Raymond, close enough that their faces were only inches apart. Real veterans do not end up like this. Real fathers do not abandon their sons. I do not know who you really are, but you are not this boy's father. He turned and walked back toward the funeral tent, his dress shoes crunching on the gravel path. And Raymond Valdez, who had led men into combat in 11 countries, who had earned decorations that would never be publicly acknowledged, who had buried 6 teammates whose names were tattooed on his arm, stood in a cemetery parking lot and watched a man half his age dismiss him as a liar. He could have stopped them. He could have said the words that would have frozen them in their tracks. He could have rolled up his sleeve and shown them the tattoo that marked him as one of the most decorated operators in Delta Force history. But he did not, because part of him believed Driscoll was right. Real fathers did not abandon their sons. Real fathers did not leave notes in the middle of the night and disappear for 6 years. Real fathers did not watch from the shadows while their children searched and grieved and finally gave up hope. The security guard took his arm again. "Come on, let's go." Raymond let himself be led away. 1 step, 2 steps, 3, and then he stopped. He had left once. He had walked away from his son once, and Elias had spent 8 years trying to find him, had joined special forces trying to understand him, had died in a country Raymond had operated in 30 years ago, doing the same work Raymond had done, carrying the same weight Raymond had carried. "I should have been there," Raymond whispered. "For his mother. For him. For all of it. I should have been there." He turned and looked back at the funeral tent. The chaplain was still speaking. The mourners were still seated. The honor guard was still at attention. And Raymond Valdez made a decision. He pulled his arm free from the security guard's grip. Not violently, not aggressively, just a simple, fluid motion that the guard could not have stopped if he had tried. "I'm not leaving," Raymond said. His voice was still quiet, but there was no tremor in it now. "I'm going to watch my son be buried. You can call the police. You can have me arrested, but I'm not leaving until they put him in the ground." And he began walking back toward the oak tree. Gerald Ashworth had never been defied at one of his funerals. In 31 years of directing services for the grieving families of Fort Campbell, he had handled drunken uncles and feuding siblings and ex-wives who should never have been invited. He had managed every disruption with quiet efficiency and professional grace. But he had never had a vagrant simply refuse to leave. "Stop him," Ashworth hissed at the security guard. "Now." The guard jogged after Raymond, grabbing his shoulder and spinning him around. "Sir, I am warning you. 1 more step and I will put you on the ground." Raymond looked at the hand on his shoulder. Then he looked at the man attached to it. The security guard was 30 years younger, 50 pounds heavier, and clearly accustomed to people backing down when he made threats. He had no idea that the homeless man he was threatening had taught hand-to-hand combat at Fort Bragg for 6 years, had trained operators who went on to become legends in their own right, had killed men in 7 countries with nothing but his bare hands and whatever happened to be within reach. But Raymond did not fight back. He simply stood there, letting the guard's fingers dig into his shoulder, his eyes drifting past the confrontation toward the white tent where his son lay waiting. "Please," Raymond said, "I am begging you." The guard's grip tightened. Begging does not change anything. You need to leave. Every mourner under the tent had turned to watch now. The chaplain had stopped speaking entirely, his Bible hanging forgotten at his side. Whispers rippled through the crowd as people craned their necks to see the commotion near the parking lot. Sergeant First Class Driscoll came striding back, his face flushed with anger. "What is going on here? I thought I told you to remove him." "He will not go," the security guard said. He just pulled away and started walking back. Driscoll positioned himself directly in Raymond's path, blocking the route to the oak tree. His hand moved to the radio on his belt. "I'm calling the MPs. This has gone far enough." From somewhere in the crowd of mourners, a woman's voice rose above the whispers. "What is happening? Who is that man?" "Nobody," Ashworth called back, his voice carrying the practiced calm of a professional. "Just a confused individual. We will have this sorted momentarily." But the whispers continued, and among the mourners, one woman was not whispering at all. Master Sergeant Leona Thibodeau had risen from her seat in the third row and was staring at the confrontation with an expression that had shifted from curiosity to something else entirely. She had noticed the homeless man earlier when he first appeared behind the oak tree. She had assumed what everyone else assumed. Vagrant, mentally ill, drawn to the ceremony for reasons only his broken mind understood. But now, watching him stand his ground against the security guard and the funeral director and the young sergeant, something was nagging at her. It was the way he stood, even with a hand on his shoulder, even exhausted and grief-stricken and clearly at the end of his physical reserves. His posture was perfect. His weight was balanced. His feet were positioned in a way that Thibodeau recognized from her 22 years of service. It was not the stance of a vagrant. It was the stance of someone who had spent decades training his body to be ready for anything. She began moving toward the edge of the tent. Driscoll had his radio to his mouth now, calling for military police backup. The security guard still had his hand on Raymond's shoulder. Ashworth was speaking rapidly into his phone, probably calling the local police as well. They were going to drag this man away in handcuffs, in front of everyone, in front of his son's casket. And Raymond was not fighting back. That was the part that confused Thibodeau the most. She had seen the way he moved when he pulled away from the security guard. Fluid, controlled, the kind of movement that came from years of training, not luck. He could have put that guard on the ground in half a second. She was certain of it, but he was not even trying to defend himself. He was just standing there, tears streaming down his face, looking at the casket. Driscoll finished his radio call and stepped closer to Raymond. You have about 3 minutes before the MPs arrive. Last chance to walk away with some dignity. Raymond's voice was barely audible. I lost my dignity a long time ago. Driscoll snorted. Finally, something honest. But there was something about the way the old man said it. Not self-pity, not the whining of someone looking for sympathy. It was a statement of fact. Cold, clinical. The voice of a man who had weighed himself and found himself wanting. Thibodeau was close enough now to see the confrontation clearly. Close enough to see the threadbare jacket held together with safety pins. Close enough to see the boots wrapped in electrical tape. Close enough to see the scars. She stopped walking. There was a scar running from the old man's left temple down to his jaw. It was old, faded to white, but unmistakable. Shrapnel scarring. She had seen enough of it during her years at Fort Bragg to recognize the pattern. And on his right hand, she noticed now, the tip of his ring finger was missing. Not cut clean, blackened at the edge. Frostbite. The kind that happened in high-altitude operations, in places where the cold could kill you faster than the enemy. Who are you? Thibodeau murmured, more to herself than anyone else. The security guard was reaching for his handcuffs now. Driscoll was watching with satisfaction. Ashworth was directing the whole scene like it was just another disruption to be managed. And then Raymond moved. Not toward them, not away from them. He simply reached up and began unbuttoning his field jacket. His fingers moved slowly, deliberately, each button slipping free with the patience of a man who had nothing left to lose. What are you doing? Driscoll demanded. Stop that. Raymond did not stop. He pulled the jacket open, revealing a threadbare gray t-shirt beneath. And hanging against his chest on a tarnished chain, 2 sets of dog tags clinked softly together. Driscoll's hand shot out and grabbed the tags before Raymond could react. Let me see these. Probably bought them at a surplus store. He held them up to the light, squinting at the worn engravings. The first set was old, the letters almost worn smooth. Valdez, Raymond A. A service number. Blood type O positive. Catholic. U.S. Army. Driscoll's brow furrowed. These look real. They are real, Raymond said quietly. Driscoll flipped to the second set. These were newer, the engravings still crisp. Valdez, A. Yasser. Another service number. Blood type O positive. No religious preference. U.S. Army. His hand froze. Where did you get these? Driscoll asked, and for the first time there was something other than contempt in his voice. These are not surplus store tags. This is the dead soldier. His fingers tightened around the metal. These are his actual dog tags. Did you steal them from the family? Raymond's answer was so quiet that only those closest could hear it. They were the first set he was ever issued. The day he enlisted, I asked him to send them to me so I would have something to carry, something to remind me that he was still out there, still alive. His voice cracked on the last word. I have carried them for 6 years, Raymond continued. Every day, every night, they were the only piece of him I let myself keep. Driscoll stared at the dog tags in his hand. The name on the older set, Valdez, Raymond A. The name on the newer set, Valdez, Eliezer. The same last name, the same blood type, father and son. But his skepticism had been hardened by years of dealing with liars and frauds. Names could be faked. Anyone could have researched the family. Prove it, Driscoll said. If you're really his father, prove it. And Thibodeau, standing 5 meters away, watched as the old man slowly raised his hand and began rolling up his right sleeve. She saw the tattoo before Driscoll did. She saw the faded ink emerging from beneath the grime and the weathered skin. And her blood went cold. It was a unit insignia she recognized. An insignia that was not supposed to exist on any official record. Beneath it, coordinates: 33.5945 degrees north, 7.6100 degrees west. And beneath the coordinates, 6 names in small, precise lettering. Thibodeau had spent 8 years at Fort Bragg. She had worked in support roles for units that officially did not exist. She had heard stories, legends, whispers in hallways about operators whose missions would never be declassified. And she had heard stories about a call sign, a name spoken with reverence by men who feared nothing else on earth. Spectre. Her hand flew to her mouth. Oh my God. Driscoll looked up from the dog tags, confused by her reaction. What? But Thibodeau was not looking at Driscoll. She was looking at the old man, at the tattoo, at the coordinates that marked a city she knew from history books and classified briefings. Mogadishu, 1993, the operation that had shaped modern special operations doctrine, the battle that had killed 18 Americans and wounded 73 more. And the man standing in front of her, the vagrant they had been trying to drag away from his own son's funeral, had been there, had survived, had earned a call sign that was still whispered in the halls of Fort Bragg 30 years later. She pushed past Driscoll, past the security guard, and stopped directly in front of Raymond Valdez. Spectre, she breathed. The word came out broken, reverent, terrified. You are Spectre. Raymond looked at her with eyes that held 30 years of ghosts. I was, he said, a long time ago. And behind them, in the crowd of mourners that had gathered to watch the confrontation, a woman in black began pushing her way forward. Captain Diane Holloway had been sitting in the front row, next to the empty seat that should have held the father of the man she was supposed to marry in 3 months. She had heard the name Spectre. She had heard Elias say that name 100 times. Dad talked about someone called Spectre, Elias had told her once. Said he was the greatest soldier he ever knew. Said he wanted to be just like him someday. Diane had asked if Elias knew who Spectre really was. Elias had smiled sadly. I think he was my father. I think my father was Spectre, but I have never been able to prove it. And now Diane was running across the cemetery grass, her heels sinking into the soft earth, her black dress billowing behind her, because the woman near the parking lot had just said the name that Elias had spent 8 years chasing. The name that belonged to a ghost. The name that belonged to the homeless man they were trying to remove from his own son's funeral. The name Spectre hung in the air like smoke from a distant fire. Thibodeau was trembling. Driscoll was staring at the tattoo on Raymond's forearm with an expression caught somewhere between disbelief and dawning horror. The security guard had released Raymond's shoulder entirely and taken 2 full steps backward, as if proximity to this man had suddenly become dangerous. Raymond did not notice any of them. His eyes had found the woman running across the grass, her black dress streaming behind her, and something in his face shifted. Recognition, not of her specifically, but of what she represented. She was coming from the front row, from the family section, from the place where the people who loved Elias were supposed to sit. Diane Holloway stopped 3 feet away from him, breathing hard. Her eyes were red from crying. Her mascara streaked down her cheeks, but she was not looking at Raymond with grief. She was looking at him with something that might have been hope. Spectre, she said. Elias talked about you. He said you were the greatest soldier he ever knew. Raymond's throat tightened. He did not trust himself to speak. He said he thought you might be his father. Diane's voice cracked. He spent years trying to find proof, going through old records, talking to veterans who served in the 80s and 90s, trying to find anyone who knew the Real identity behind the call sign. Raymond closed his eyes. The weight of those words pressed down on him like a physical force. His son had spent years searching for a ghost, and the ghost had been watching the whole time, too ashamed to step out of the shadows. I am sorry, Raymond whispered. The words were inadequate. He knew they were inadequate, but they were all he had. Diane stared at him. Are you really his father? Raymond opened his eyes and looked at her directly. Elias Rafael Valdez, born March 17, 1996 at Womack Army Medical Center, Fort Bragg. His mother's name was Sophia. She had a birthmark on her right wrist shaped like a heart, and she used to joke that God had marked her so I would know where to find her. Diane's hand flew to her mouth. When Elias was 4, I taught him to tie a bowline knot. It took him 3 hours to get it right. When he was 6, he asked me why I had to go away so much, and I told him it was because there were people who needed help. When he was 10, he caught his first fish and cried because he did not want to hurt it. Raymond's voice was steady now, each word precise, each memory drawn from the deep well of everything he had tried to bury. When he was 12, he told me he did not want to be an astronaut anymore. He wanted to be a soldier. He wanted to be like me. And I told him that being a soldier was not something to aspire to. It was something you became because you had no other choice. He looked past Diane toward the casket under the white tent. He did not listen. He never listened when it came to following me. Diane was crying openly now. Elias wrote you a letter before his last deployment. He never sent it. Raymond's composure cracked. What? It was in his personal effects. When they sent his things home, Diane wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. He wrote you a letter, and he kept it. For months. I think he was waiting until he found you to give it to you in person. Raymond felt his knees begin to buckle. He locked them in place through sheer force of will, the same way he had locked them during 12-hour static surveillance positions in desert heat and mountain cold. He had trained his body to ignore its own limitations. But this was different. This was not physical exhaustion. This was something far worse. What did it say? He asked, and his voice sounded foreign to his own ears. Diane shook her head. I did not read it. It was addressed to you. It is still sealed. She paused, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. I have it. In my car. I was not sure why I brought it today. I just felt like I should have it with me. Raymond could not speak, could not move, could not do anything but stand there as the revelation washed over him. His son had written him a letter, had carried it for months, had been waiting to deliver it in person, waiting to find a father who had abandoned him, waiting for a reunion that would never come. And now Elias was dead, and the letter was sitting in a car in a cemetery parking lot, still sealed, still waiting. Thibodeau stepped forward, her voice gentle but urgent. We need to move this somewhere else. The colonel is watching. Everyone is watching. Raymond looked up and realized she was right. The entire funeral had stopped. Every mourner was staring at the confrontation. The chaplain stood frozen with his Bible still open. The honor guard soldiers had broken their rigid formation and were exchanging confused glances. And walking toward them from the tent, his face unreadable, was Colonel Marcus Okonkwo. Driscoll snapped to attention as the colonel approached, his earlier confidence evaporating like morning fog. Sir, there has been a situation. This individual was attempting to disrupt the funeral, and we were in the process of removing him when Colonel Okonkwo held up one hand, and Driscoll fell silent immediately. The colonel was a tall man, broad-shouldered, with the kind of bearing that came from 3 decades of military service and 3 combat deployments with Special Forces. His dress uniform was immaculate, his ribbons forming neat rows across his chest, his colonel's eagles gleaming in the gray October light. He stopped directly in front of Raymond and studied him for a long moment. His eyes moved from the ragged clothes to the dog tag still hanging against Raymond's chest, to the tattoo visible on his forearm, to the scars that mapped a lifetime of violence across his weathered skin. Command Sergeant Major Valdez, Okonkwo said quietly, "Your son talked about you every single day." Raymond's breath caught in his throat. "He showed me photographs. Old ones from before you left. You look different then. Younger, less worn, but the eyes are the same." Okonkwo's voice was steady, but there was emotion beneath the professional control. "Elias spent years trying to find you. He talked to everyone who might have known you. He filed requests for records that were classified above his clearance level. He never gave up." "Sir," Driscoll interjected, "we have no proof that this man is actually—" Okonkwo turned his head slowly and fixed Driscoll with a stare that could have frozen water in August. "Sergeant, you're going to stop talking now." Driscoll's mouth snapped shut. Okonkwo returned his attention to Raymond. "When I took command of Elias's unit, he asked me if I had ever heard of an operator called Spectre. I told him I had. Everyone who served in special operations in the 90s had heard of Spectre. He asked me if I knew who Spectre really was. I told him I did not." The colonel paused. "But I made some calls, pulled some strings, got access to files I probably should not have been able to see. I found out exactly who Spectre was." Okonkwo's voice dropped even lower. "I was going to tell Elias when he got back from his last deployment. I was going to give him your service record as a gift, to prove that his father was exactly the hero he always believed you were." Raymond felt something break inside him. A wall he had built over 6 years, brick by brick, day by day, crumbled into dust. "He never got back," Raymond said. The words came out broken. "No, Okonkwo replied. He did not." For a moment, neither man spoke. The wind picked up, carrying the snap of flags and the rustle of autumn leaves across the cemetery grounds. Then Okonkwo reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. "I made a call 5 minutes ago. To Fort Bragg. To someone who has access to your complete service record." Raymond looked at the phone, then at the colonel. "I know who you are, Command Sergeant Major." Okonkwo's voice carried clearly across the silent crowd. "I know what you did. I know what you sacrificed. And I know that the man Sergeant Driscoll has been trying to remove from the cemetery is the most decorated operator in the history of Delta Force." The words landed like artillery shells. Driscoll went pale. Ashworth made a small choking sound. The security guard looked like he wanted the earth to open up and swallow him whole. And Raymond Valdez, who had spent 6 years hiding from everyone who ever loved him, stood in front of his son's casket and finally stopped running. The silence that followed Colonel Okonkwo's words was absolute. Not even the wind seemed to move. The mourners under the tent sat frozen in their seats. The honor guard soldiers stood like statues, their rifles motionless at their sides. Even the flags on the nearby graves seemed to hang limp, as if the entire cemetery was holding its breath. Gerald Ashworth was the first to break. His face had gone the color of old ash, and his hands were trembling so badly that his phone slipped from his fingers and clattered onto the grass. He did not bend to pick it up. He could not seem to move at all. "I did not know," Ashworth stammered. "How could I have known? He looked like a vagrant. He smelled like he had been living on the street. I was just trying to protect the dignity of the ceremony." Colonel Okonkwo did not even glance at him. His eyes remained fixed on Raymond, and there was something in his expression that went beyond military respect. It was recognition, one warrior acknowledging another. Sergeant Driscoll had gone rigid, his face cycling through emotions too quickly to track. Disbelief, horror, shame. His earlier confidence had evaporated completely, replaced by the dawning understanding that he had just committed the worst mistake of his career. Sir Driscoll said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I did not realize. The way he looked, I assumed. You assumed," Okonkwo cut him off, "that a man's worth could be measured by his appearance. You assumed that because he was homeless, he could not possibly be a hero. You assumed that real veterans do not end up living on the streets." Driscoll flinched as his own words were thrown back at him. "There are over 37,000 homeless veterans in this country, Sergeant." Okonkwo's voice was cold and precise. Men and women who served their nation, who sacrificed everything, and who fell through the cracks of a system that was supposed to protect them. And you just try to drag one of them away from his own son's funeral because he did not look the way you thought a veteran should look. Raymond raised his hand slightly. Coronel, it is not his fault. He was doing what he thought was right. Okonkwo turned to look at Raymond, and something softened in his expression. That is exactly what Elias would have said. He always defended people, even when they did not deserve it. Raymond's jaw tightened at the mention of his son's name. He could not think about Elias right now. If he started thinking about Elias, he would collapse, and he could not collapse. Not yet. Not until this was over. Diane stepped forward, her hand reaching out to touch Raymond's arm. The letter is in my car. Do you want me to get it? Raymond looked at her hand on his arm. It was the first time someone had touched him with kindness in 6 years. Not the grip of a security guard. Not the rough handling of shelter workers moving him along. Just a gentle touch from someone who cared. He did not know how to respond to it. He had forgotten what kindness felt like. Later, he managed to say, after the funeral, please. Diane nodded and withdrew her hand, but she stayed close. A presence at his side. A connection to the son he had lost. Thibodeau had moved to stand near Okonkwo, her expression still shaken by what she had witnessed. Sir, should we continue the ceremony? The family deserves closure. Okonkwo nodded slowly. Yes, we should continue. He looked at Raymond. But first, Command Sergeant Major Valdez needs to take his rightful place. Raymond shook his head. I cannot sit with the family. I do not deserve. You are the family. Okonkwo's voice left no room for argument. You are his father. You are his next of kin, and you will sit in the front row where you belong. But I abandoned him. Raymond's voice cracked. I left him for 6 years. I let him search for me, and I never. Elias forgave you. Diane's words cut through his protest. I do not know what is in that letter, but I know what was in his heart. He loved you. He never stopped loving you, and he would have wanted you here. Raymond looked at the casket, at the flag draped over the box that held everything that remained of his son. 28 years of life, reduced to a rectangle of polished wood and folded cloth. He had been there when Elias took his first breath. He had held that tiny body in his arms and felt a love so overwhelming that it had terrified him. A Delta Force operator who had faced death in a dozen countries, terrified by a 7-pound infant with his mother's eyes. And now he was here for the last breath, for the final moment, for the goodbye he had never gotten to say in person. Okay, Raymond whispered. Okay. Okonkwo nodded and turned to address the crowd. Ladies and gentlemen, there has been a development. The man some of you witnessed being removed from these grounds is Command Sergeant Major Raymond Valdez, retired. He served 24 years in the United States Army, including extensive service with units whose existence remains classified to this day. Murmurs rippled through the mourners. Raymond could feel their eyes on him, reassessing, reevaluating, seeing him differently now that they knew. More importantly, Okonkwo continued. He is the father of Corporal First Class Elias Valdez, the man we are here to honor and bury today. The murmurs became gasps. A woman in the third row began to cry. An elderly man in a VFW cap removed it and held it over his heart. There were circumstances that separated them. Okonkwo's voice carried across the silent cemetery. Circumstances that are not mine to explain. But Elias spent the last 8 years of his life searching for his father. He never stopped believing that he would find him. And today, in the cruelest twist of fate I have ever witnessed, his father found his way here. Only be told he did not belong at his own son's funeral. Ashworth made a small sound, something between a whimper and a moan. His carefully constructed world of propriety and protocol had crumbled around him. He had built his career on dignity, and he had just committed the most undignified act imaginable. Driscoll stood motionless, his eyes fixed on some point in the middle distance. The young sergeant who had accused Raymond of stolen valor, who had declared that real veterans did not end up homeless, looked like a man watching his own reflection shatter. Command Sergeant Major Valdez will now take his place with the family. Okonkwo extended his hand toward the front row. If you would, sir. Raymond looked at the tent, at the rows of chairs, at the empty seat in the front row that had been waiting for him all along, even though no one had known it was his. He began to walk. The crowd parted before him. Mourners stepped aside, making way. Some nodded as he passed. Others wiped tears from their eyes. A few reached out to touch his arm, his shoulder, his back. Brief contacts. Acknowledgments. Raymond did not feel any of it. He was walking toward his son, toward the casket he had traveled 47 miles to see, toward the goodbye he had been denied for 6 years. Private First Class Amanda Reyes, the young soldier from the honor guard who had watched the entire confrontation with growing distress, stepped forward as Raymond approached the tent. She was crying openly, her composure broken by the weight of what she had witnessed. "Sir," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "I am so sorry. I should have said something. I should have stopped them." Raymond paused and looked at her young face, streaked with tears, at the uniform she wore with obvious pride, at the guilt in her eyes. "You did nothing wrong," he said quietly. "You followed orders. That is what soldiers do. But it was wrong." Her voice broke. "What they did to you was wrong." Raymond reached out and touched her shoulder. The same way he had touched Elias's shoulder 1,000 times. The same way he had tried to pass strength from his body to his son's. "Learn from it," he said. "That is all any of us can do. See the person, not the appearance. Remember that everyone you meet is fighting a battle you cannot see." Reyes nodded, tears streaming down her face. And Raymond continued walking, toward the front row, toward the empty seat, toward his son. He lowered himself into the chair, slowly, his exhausted body protesting every movement. Diane sat down beside him, close enough that their arms touched. The contact was strange and familiar all at once, like remembering a language he had not spoken in years. The casket was 5 feet away, close enough to touch, close enough to see the grain of the wood, the precise folds of the flag, the brass handles gleaming dully in the gray light. Elias was in there, his boy, his son, the child who had cried over a fish and wanted to be an astronaut and followed his father into a life of service and sacrifice. "I am here," Raymond whispered, so quietly that only Diane could hear him. "I am finally here." And somewhere in the distance, thunder rumbled, as if even the sky was mourning. The chaplain approached the podium again, his Bible clutched against his chest like a shield. He was a young man, no more than 35, and Raymond could see that the events of the last 20 minutes had shaken him deeply. His hands trembled as he opened the book. His voice wavered as he tried to resume the service. "We gather here today to honor the life and sacrifice of Corporal First Class Elias Rafael Valdez," the chaplain began. A soldier, a man who gave everything in service to his country. Raymond listened to the words, but they seemed to come from very far away. He was looking at the casket, at the flag, at the polished wood that separated him from his son. The last time he had seen Elias in person was 6 years ago, the morning after Sophia's funeral. Elias had been standing in the kitchen, staring at the note Raymond had left on the table. His face had been blank, unreadable, but his hands had been shaking as he held the paper. Raymond had watched from the tree line behind the house. He had wanted to go back. He wanted to walk through the door and take back every word he had written. But he had seen the look on Elias's face in that hospital room. The accusation. The question he could not answer. "Where were you, Dad?" So he had turned and walked away. And he had kept walking for 6 years. Now he was sitting 5 feet from his son's body, and he would never be able to explain why he left, would never be able to apologize properly, would never be able to tell Elias that abandoning him had been the worst mistake of his entire life. Diane's hand found his, her fingers intertwined with his own, squeezing gently. Raymond looked down at their joined hands, at her delicate fingers wrapped around his scarred and weathered ones. "He talked about you constantly," Diane whispered, so low that only Raymond could hear. "Every mission, every training exercise, every quiet moment. He would wonder where you were, what you were doing, whether you were okay." Raymond's throat constricted. He could not speak. "He never blamed you for leaving." Diane's voice was steady despite her tears. "He blamed himself. He thought he had driven you away somehow. He thought if he had just been a better son, you would have stayed." The words hit Raymond like bullets, each one tearing through the walls he had built around his heart. "No, he managed. No, that is not. He did not drive me away. It was never him. It was never his fault. I know that. Diane squeezed his hand tighter, and I think deep down he knew it too. But knowing something and believing it are different things. Raymond closed his eyes. He could see Elias at 6 years old, sitting on his lap, asking why Daddy had to go away so much. He could see Elias at 10, crying over a fish he did not want to hurt. He could see Elias at 12, saying he wanted to be a soldier, wanted to be like his father. And he could see Elias at 20, standing in a hospital room, looking at him with Sophia's eyes, asking the question that had haunted Raymond for 8 years. Where were you, Dad? The truth was simple and devastating. He had been in Yemen. He had been on a mission that was supposed to last 3 days and stretched into 3 weeks. He had been doing what he had always done, putting the mission first, trusting that Sophia would be there when he got back. But Sophia had not waited. The cancer had not waited, and by the time Raymond made it home, she was gone. Elias had held her hand at the end. Elias had heard her final words. Elias had been the one to close her eyes. And Raymond had arrived 6 hours too late, still wearing the dust of a country he could not name, still carrying the weight of a mission he could not discuss. He had looked at his son across Sophia's hospital bed, and he had seen the accusation in those dark eyes. The same eyes Sophia had, the same shape, the same color, the same way they crinkled at the corners when she smiled. But Elias had not been smiling, and Raymond had run, because he could not face those eyes, could not face the question, could not face the truth that he had chosen the mission over his wife's final days, and nothing he could ever do would make that right. The chaplain was still speaking, but Raymond was not listening anymore. He was lost in memory, in guilt, in the crushing weight of 6 years of silence. He joined Special Forces because of you, Diane continued. He wanted to understand you. He thought if he walked the same path, carried the same burdens, he might finally understand why you were the way you were, why the mission always came first. Raymond opened his eyes and looked at her. And did he? Did he understand? Diane's smile was sad and beautiful. I think so. He stopped being angry somewhere around his second deployment. He came back different, quieter, more thoughtful. He said he finally got it. He said he understood why you could not just walk away from the people who depended on you. Raymond felt tears sliding down his cheeks. He did not wipe them away. He also said he would have made the same choice you did. Diane's voice wavered. If it came down his team or coming home to me, he said he would choose his team. Because that is what soldiers do. That is what good soldiers do. The words broke something inside Raymond. A dam he had built over decades of compartmentalizing, of separating emotion from action, of doing what needed to be done regardless of the personal cost. His shoulders began to shake. Quiet sobs escaped from somewhere deep in his chest. He tried to hold them back, tried to maintain the composure he had cultivated over 24 years of military service, but he could not. His son had forgiven him, had understood him, had walked the same path and arrived at the same conclusion. And Raymond had never known, had spent 6 years hiding in the shadows, convinced that Elias hated him, when the truth was exactly the opposite. The chaplain paused in his remarks, watching the scene in the front row with compassionate eyes. The mourners behind them sat in respectful silence, witnessing a grief too private and too powerful to interrupt. Diane put her arm around Raymond's shoulders, pulling him close. He leaned into her, this woman he had never met, this woman who had loved his son, this woman who was offering him comfort he did not deserve. He forgave you, Diane whispered again. He forgave you a long time ago. He just never got the chance to tell you. Raymond pressed his hand to his chest, feeling the dog tags beneath his palm. 2 sets, his and Elias's, father and son, joined together on a single chain for 6 years. He had carried his son's tags every day, had touched them every morning and every night, had whispered apologies to them in the darkness of shelters and underpasses and abandoned buildings. And all that time, Elias had been searching for him, had been forgiving him, had been waiting for a reunion that would never come. The thunder rumbled again, closer now. The gray sky was darkening, clouds gathering in the west like mourners assembling for a second funeral. Raymond looked up at the sky, then back at the casket. "I am sorry," he said aloud. His voice carried in the stillness. I am so sorry, Elias. I should have come home. I should have let you find me. I should have been there for all of it. The wind picked up, carrying his words across the cemetery. Flags snapped on their poles. Leaves skittered across the grass. And, somewhere in the distance, a single bird began to sing. Diane held him tighter. He heard you, she said. Wherever he is, he heard you. Raymond closed his eyes and let himself believe it. Let himself believe that somewhere, somehow, Elias knew he was there. Knew he had come. Knew he had never stopped loving him, even when he could not find the courage to say it. The chaplain cleared his throat softly. Shall I continue? He asked. Raymond nodded without opening his eyes. Yes, he said. Continue. Let us give my son the farewell he deserves. The chaplain spoke of duty and sacrifice and the bonds between soldiers that transcended death. He spoke of Elias's courage, his dedication, his unwavering commitment to the men and women who served beside him. He spoke of a young man who had given everything for his country and asked nothing in return. Raymond listened to every word. He memorized each phrase, each sentiment, each tribute to the son he had failed. He would carry these words with him for the rest of his life, adding them to the weight he already bore. When the chaplain finished, Colonel Okonkwo stepped forward. He moved with the deliberate grace of a man who had spent decades carrying the responsibility of other people's lives on his shoulders. I served with Elias for 2 years, Okonkwo said. His voice was strong and clear, reaching every corner of the silent gathering. In that time, I watched him become one of the finest soldiers I have ever had the privilege to command. Raymond's hands tightened in his lap. He could feel Diane watching him from the corner of her eye, ready to offer support if he needed it. Elias never talked about himself. Okonkwo continued. He never bragged about his accomplishments or sought recognition for his actions. But he talked about his father constantly. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Raymond felt the weight of their attention shifting toward him. He told me his father was a ghost. Okonkwo's eyes found Raymond in the front row. He said his father had served in places that did not exist, done things that would never be acknowledged, and then disappeared from his life without explanation. He said he spent years trying to understand why, trying to find him, trying to reconcile the hero he remembered from childhood with the man who had walked away. Raymond's vision blurred. He blinked rapidly, trying to clear the tears that kept forming. I asked Elias once if he was angry at his father. Okonkwo paused, letting the question hang in the air. He told me that anger was a luxury soldiers could not afford. He told me that he had learned, through his own service, that some wounds were invisible, that some battles never ended, that sometimes the strongest men were the ones who were breaking apart on the inside. The word struck Raymond like physical blows. His son had understood, had seen through the silence and the distance and the years of separation to the truth beneath. Elias told me he believed his father was still fighting. Okonkwo's voice softened. Not an enemy you could see or name, but something just as real, just as dangerous. He said he hoped his father would find peace someday, and he said that when that day came, he wanted to be there to welcome him home. Raymond could not hold back the sob that escaped his throat. It tore through him, raw and broken, echoing across the silent cemetery. Diane's arm tightened around his shoulders. Other mourners were crying now, too. Even some of the honor guard soldiers had tears streaming down their faces. Okonkwo waited until the moment passed before continuing. I do not know the full story of what happened between Elias and his father. That is not my story to tell. But I know this. He looked directly at Raymond. Your son loved you. He never stopped loving you. And he would have given anything to see you one more time. Raymond forced himself to meet the colonel's eyes, to accept the words that were both a gift and a condemnation. When Elias deployed for the last time, Okonkwo said, he told me he had a feeling. Soldiers sometimes get those feelings before missions, a sense that something is about to change. He said if anything happened to him, he wanted me to keep looking for his father. He wanted me to find him and tell him the truth. Raymond's breath caught. What truth? Okonkwo reached into his uniform pocket and withdrew a folded piece of paper. He held it carefully as if it were made of glass. Elias wrote this 3 days before he was killed. He gave it to me and asked me to keep it safe. He said if he did not make it back, I should read it at his funeral. He said the words were meant for someone who might not be there to hear them. But he hoped, somehow, they would find their way to the right person. The colonel unfolded the paper slowly. The crowd held its collective breath. Dad, Okonkwo began reading, his voice steady despite the emotion behind it. I know you probably will not hear this. I know you're somewhere out there, fighting whatever battle you are fighting, carrying whatever weight you are carrying. But I need to say these words, even if they never reach you. Raymond stopped breathing. I forgive you. Okonkwo's voice cracked slightly on the words. I forgave you a long time ago. I was angry for a while. I will not lie about that. I was angry and hurt and confused. I did not understand how you could leave, how you could walk away from everything we had. The tears were flowing freely down Raymond's face now. He made no effort to stop them. But then I became a soldier, and I started to understand. The colonel paused to collect himself before continuing. I understand now that some wounds do not heal. I understand that sometimes love is not enough to fix what is broken. I understand that you did not leave because you stopped caring. You left because you cared too much, because looking at me meant looking at Mom, and that was more than you could bear. Diane was crying openly beside him. Thibodeau had her hand pressed to her mouth. Even Okonkwo's eyes were glistening. I do not blame you, Dad. I never did. Not really. I just missed you. Every day, I missed you. And I kept hoping that someday you would find your way back. That you would come home, and I could tell you in person that everything is okay. That I understand. That I love you no matter what. Okonkwo's voice broke completely. He paused, wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, and forced himself to continue. If you're hearing this, it means I did not make it back. It means our reunion did not happen the way I hoped. But that is okay, Dad, because I know you love me. I always knew. And wherever you are right now, whatever you are doing, I hope you know that I loved you too. I hope you know that you were my hero. Not because of the missions, or the medals, or the things you did in places that do not exist. You were my hero because you taught me to tie my first knot. Because you held me when I cried over a fish. Because you made me believe that good men exist in a world full of darkness. Raymond's body was shaking now, years of suppressed grief pouring out of him in waves. Find peace, Dad. Okonkwo's voice was barely a whisper. That is all I ever wanted for you. Find peace, and know that wherever I am proud to be your son. The colonel folded the paper carefully and looked at Raymond. He signed it, Okonkwo said quietly. Your son signed this letter with 2 words. Raymond looked up, tears streaming down his face. Still searching, Okonkwo said. He signed it, still searching. The words hung in the air like a final breath. Still searching. After everything. After years of silence and distance and separation. Elias had still been searching. And now the search was over. Not because father and son had found each other, but because there was no one left to search. Raymond pressed both hands against his face and wept. He wept for the son he had abandoned, for the wife he had failed, for the years he had wasted hiding from the people who loved him, for the reunion that would never happen and the words that would never be spoken. He wept for Elias, for the boy who had cried over a fish, for the man who had forgiven his father without ever getting to tell him. And somewhere above them, thunder rolled across the darkening sky, and the first drops of rain began to fall. The rain fell softly at first, a gentle mist that settled over the cemetery like a veil. No one moved to seek shelter. No one reached for umbrellas. The mourners sat in their chairs and let the rain touch their faces, as if the sky itself was weeping for Elias Valdez. Colonel Okonkwo carefully refolded the letter and walked to the front row. He stopped in front of Raymond and held out the paper. This belongs to you, Okonkwo said. He would have wanted you to have it. Raymond looked at the folded paper through tear-blurred eyes. His son's final words. The forgiveness he had never known existed. The love that had survived 6 years of silence. His hand trembled as he reached out and took the letter. The paper was warm from Okonkwo's pocket, soft from being handled. Raymond pressed it against his chest, over his heart, over the dog tags that had never left his body. Thank you, Raymond whispered. The words were inadequate, but they were all he had. Okonkwo nodded once, then turned to address the gathering. We will now proceed with the military honors, the colonel announced. I would ask that everyone please rise. The mourners stood as one. Raymond forced himself to his feet, his legs unsteady, his body exhausted beyond measure. Diane stood beside him, her hand finding his again, anchoring him to the present moment. The honor guard moved into position. 7 soldiers in dress uniforms, their movements synchronized with mechanical precision. They raised their rifles toward the gray sky, barrels gleaming with rain. "Ready," the sergeant in charge called out. Raymond straightened his spine, squared his shoulders, muscle memory taking over where conscious thought could not. Aim. The rifles leveled. Fire. The first volley split the silence. 7 shots, perfectly timed, echoing across the cemetery like thunder answering thunder. Raymond did not flinch. He had heard that sound too many times to count. On battlefields and training grounds, and at funerals for men whose names were tattooed on his arm. Ready. Aim. Fire. The second volley. Raymond's jaw tightened. He thought of the 6 names inked into his skin. Brothers he had lost in places that did not exist. Men who had trusted him with their lives and paid the ultimate price. Ready. Aim. Fire. The third volley. 21 shots total. The final salute for a fallen soldier. The echoes faded into the rain. Silence reclaimed the cemetery. A lone bugler stepped forward. Young, no more than 20, with a face that reminded Raymond painfully of Elias at that age. The soldier raised his instrument to his lips and began to play. The first notes of taps drifted across the graves, soft and mournful, each tone hanging in the air before dissolving into the mist. The melody was simple, just 24 notes, but it carried the weight of every soldier who had ever fallen, every family who had ever received the news, every flag that had ever been folded and presented. Raymond's lips moved silently, forming words he had not spoken in decades. Day is done, gone the sun. From the hills, from the lake, from the sky. All is well, safely rest. God is nigh. He had sung those words at too many funerals, had watched too many caskets lowered into the ground, had handed too many folded flags to grieving widows and orphan children. And now he was on the other side. Now he was the one receiving, the one grieving, the one left behind. The final note of taps faded into silence. The bugler lowered his instrument and stepped back. The honor guard moved to the casket. 8 soldiers now, for on each side, their white gloves bright against the dark wood. They lifted the flag from the casket with practiced reverence, holding it taut above the polished surface. Raymond watched as they began to fold. 13 folds, each one precise, each one meaningful. He had performed this ritual himself more times than he could remember, but he had never watched it from this side, never watched it with his son beneath the flag. The first fold, a symbol of life. The second fold, a symbol of belief in eternal life. The third, an honor and tribute to the departing veteran. Raymond counted each fold in his mind, matching the movements with the meanings he had memorized decades ago. The flag grew smaller with each iteration, transforming from a rectangle into a tight triangle of stars and stripes. The soldiers finished the final fold. One of them inspected the result, ensuring no red showed, ensuring the blue field of stars was perfectly displayed. Then they turned and walked toward the front row, toward Raymond. He had not expected this. He had assumed the flag would go to Diane, to Elias's fiancée, to the woman who had been waiting for him to come home. But the soldiers walked past Diane and stopped directly in front of Raymond. Colonel Okonkwo stepped forward and took the folded flag from the honor guard soldier. He held it carefully, reverently, like a sacred object. On behalf of the President of the United States Army, and a grateful nation, Okonkwo said, his voice thick with emotion, "I present this flag as a symbol of our appreciation for your son's honorable and faithful service." He held out the flag. Raymond stared at it. The triangle of fabric that represented everything his son had been, everything he had sacrificed, everything he had believed in. His hand was shaking as he reached out. His fingers, scarred and weathered from decades of service, closed around the folded cloth. It was heavier than he remembered. Or maybe that was just the weight of what it meant. He pulled the flag to his chest and held it there, pressed it against his heart where the dog tags rested, where the letter now waited to be read again and again until the words were burned into his memory. "Thank you," he said. His voice was barely audible, but the words carried. "Thank you for bringing my son home." Okonkwo saluted, a crisp, formal gesture that spoke louder than any words could. Raymond returned the salute automatically, his arm rising with the precision of 24 years of training, his hand touching his brow and holding there for a 3 count before dropping back to his side. It was the first time he had saluted in 6 years. The first time he had acknowledged his service, his rank, his identity as a soldier. And it was for his son. The rain continued to fall, soft and steady, washing over the mourners and the casket and the freshly turned earth waiting to receive Elias's body. Diane touched Raymond's arm gently. "The chaplain wants to know if you would like to say something," she said, before they lower the casket. "If there are any words you want to say." Raymond looked at the casket, at the flag he held in his arms, at the rectangle of polished wood that contained everything that remained of his son. He had spent 6 years running from words, hiding from conversations, letting silence speak for him because he could not find the courage to speak for himself. But Elias deserved words. Elias had written him a letter full of forgiveness and love. The least Raymond could do was answer. "Yes," Raymond said. His voice was stronger now, steadier. "Yes, I have something to say." He released Diane's hand and stepped forward, toward the casket, toward his son, toward the goodbye he had been avoiding for 6 years. The rain fell around him like tears from heaven, and Raymond Valdez, who had led men into battle across 11 countries, who had earned decorations that would never be publicly acknowledged, who had spent 6 years hiding from everyone who loved him, opened his mouth to speak to his son for the last time. Raymond placed his hand on the casket. The wood was cool beneath his palm, slick with rain. He could feel the grain through his weathered skin, could feel the solidity of it, the finality. His son was inside this box, the boy he had taught to tie knots, the man he had watched from shadows, the soldier who had followed in his footsteps and paid the price. Raymond closed his eyes for a moment, gathering himself. When he opened them again, his voice came out steady and clear, carrying across the silent cemetery. "Elias," he began, "I do not know if you can hear me. I do not know if there is anything after this, if you're somewhere watching, or if these words are just sounds disappearing into the rain. But I need to say them. I need you to know." He paused, his throat tightening. "I failed you." Raymond's voice cracked on the word. "I failed your mother. I failed everyone who ever counted on me. I spent 24 years serving my country, doing things that I cannot talk about, being the man everyone needed me to be. And then your mother got sick, and I was not there. I was on a mission. I was always on a mission. And by the time I got home, she was gone." The mourners sat in absolute silence. Even the rain seemed to fall more quietly, as if the world itself was listening. I looked at you across her hospital bed, and I saw her eyes looking back at me. The same eyes, the same color, the same shape. And I saw the question in them. Where were you, Dad? Where were you when she needed you? Where were you when I needed you? Raymond's hand pressed harder against the casket. I did not have an answer. I still do not have an answer. I chose the mission. I always chose the mission. Because that was who I was. That was all I knew how to be. And your mother paid the price. You paid the price. Everyone I loved paid the price for the choices I made. He drew a shaky breath. So I ran. I convinced myself that leaving was the right thing to do. That you were better off without a father who could not look at you without seeing everything he had lost. That my presence would only remind you of her, of what we had, of what I had destroyed by not being there when it mattered most. His voice dropped lower, more intimate, as if he was speaking only to Elias now. But that was a lie. That was a lie I told myself, so I could justify being a coward. The truth is that I ran because I could not face my own failure. I ran because looking at you meant looking at myself, and I could not stand what I saw. Raymond opened his eyes and stared at the casket. You spent 8 years searching for me. I know because I was watching. I tracked your career the way I used to track targets. From a distance, without being seen. I watched you graduate from basic training. I watched you earn your Green Beret. I watched you become the soldier I always knew you could be. His voice strengthened with pride, even as tears continued to stream down his face. And every time I saw you, every time I watched from the shadows, I told myself that today would be the day. Today I would step out of hiding. Today I would let you find me. Today I would finally tell you how sorry I was, how proud I was, how much I loved you. He shook his head slowly. But I never did, because I was afraid. Afraid you would look at me the way you looked at me in that hospital room. Afraid you would ask the question I could not answer. Afraid that seeing me would bring back all the pain I had caused. Raymond pulled Elias's letter from where he had pressed it against his chest. He held it up, the paper already soft with rain. I did not know about this letter until today. I did not know you had forgiven me. I did not know you understood. I did not know you were proud to be my son. His voice broke completely on the last words. I thought I was protecting you by staying away. I thought my absence was a gift. But all I did was steal 8 years from both of us. 8 years of conversations we never had. 8 years of meals we never shared. 8 years of holidays and birthdays and ordinary days that we could have spent together. He pressed his forehead against the casket, not caring about the rain running down his face, not caring about the mourners watching. You signed your letter still searching. Even after everything, you were still searching. You never gave up on me. You never stopped believing that I would come home. Raymond's shoulders shook with sobs. I am here now, Elias. I am finally here, and I know it is too late. I know I cannot fix what I broke. I cannot give you back the father you deserved. I cannot undo the years of silence and distance. He straightened slowly, his hand still resting on the casket. But I can promise you this. I will not run anymore. I will not hide. Whatever time I have left, I will spend it trying to be the man you thought I was. The man your mother married. The father you remembered from when you were small, before the missions and the absences and the lies I told to protect my family from the truth of what I did. Raymond looked up at the sky, letting the rain wash over his face. You wanted me to find peace. That is what you wrote in your letter. You wanted me to find peace. And I do not know if I deserve peace. I do not know if peace is possible for someone who has done the things I have done, failed the people I have failed. He lowered his eyes back to the casket. But I will try. For you, I will try. Every day for the rest of my life, I will try to be worthy of the love you gave me, the forgiveness you offered, the faith you never lost. Raymond reached into his pocket and pulled out the photograph. The 10-year-old boy with the fishing rod and the tears in his eyes. The son who did not want to hurt a fish. The child who had grown into a hero. He placed the photograph on top of the casket, weighing it down with a small stone so the rain would not carry it away. You cried over that fish because you did not want to cause pain. You were like that your whole life. Always thinking about others. Always trying to make things right. You got that from your mother, not from me. She was the good one. She was the one who taught you how to love. He touched the photograph one last time. I'm going to let them lower you now. I'm going to let them put you in the ground next to where your mother is waiting. And I'm going to stand here and watch, because that is what fathers do. They stand watch. They bear witness. They carry the memory of their children with them until there is no more breath left to carry. Raymond stepped back from the casket. His hand fell to his side. Goodbye, Elias. He said the words aloud, letting them carry across the cemetery. Goodbye, my son, my boy, my heart. He touched his chest where the dog tags rested. I will carry you with me, just like I carried your tags for 6 years. Just like I will carry this letter until the paper falls apart in my hands. You will never be gone. Not really. Not as long as I'm still breathing. Raymond looked at Colonel Okonkwo and nodded once. You can lower him now, he said. His voice was raw but steady. Let my son rest. The colonel gestured to the soldiers waiting at the grave site. The mechanism began to hum, and slowly, gently, the casket bearing Corporal First Class Elias Rafael Valdez began its final descent into the earth. Raymond stood at attention, his body rigid, his eyes fixed on the casket, his heart breaking with every inch that disappeared into the ground. And the rain continued to fall, washing away the grime and the years and the distance, until all that remained was a father watching his son come home for the last time. The casket reached the bottom of the grave with a soft thud that seemed to echo in Raymond's chest. He remained at attention, his body locked in the position he had held 10,000 times before, while mourners began to rise from their seats and drift toward him. The first to approach was Master Sergeant Thibodeau. She stopped 2 feet in front of Raymond and snapped to attention, her hand rising in a crisp salute. "Command Sergeant Major," she said. "It is an honor." Raymond returned the salute. His arm felt heavy, weighted with exhaustion and grief, but the motion was automatic, ingrained in muscle memory that decades of homelessness could not erase. Thibodeau held the salute for a long moment before lowering her hand. "I was at Bragg for 8 years, she said quietly. "I heard the stories about operations that never officially happened, about a call sign that was spoken like a prayer by men who feared nothing else." She paused. "I never thought I would meet the man behind the legend." Raymond shook his head slowly. "There is no legend, just a soldier who made too many mistakes." "With respect, sir," Thibodeau said, "the mistakes do not erase the service. And the service does not erase the man." She stepped aside, and others took her place. Veterans who had served in different eras, different branches, different wars. Some of them had heard a specter. Some of them had not. But all of them recognized what they saw standing before them. A brother, a fellow traveler on the long road of service and sacrifice. One by one, they approached. One by one, they saluted or shook his hand or simply nodded in acknowledgement. An elderly man in a Korean War veteran's cap. A woman with a prosthetic leg and a bronze star pinned to her jacket. A young soldier who could not have been more than 20, tears streaming down his face as he struggled to find words. "Thank you for your service," the young soldier finally managed. "And I am sorry. I am so sorry for your loss." Raymond looked at him, at the youth in his face, the earnestness in his eyes. This boy had his whole life ahead of him, his whole career, all the choices Raymond had already made, for better or worse. "Serve well," Raymond told him. "And when you get the chance to go home to the people you love, take it. Do not wait. Do not put the mission first every time, because the missions will always be there, but the people will not." The young soldier nodded, wiped his eyes, and stepped away. Gerald Ashworth had not moved from his position near the parking lot. He stood alone, his expensive suit soaked through with rain, his face a mask of shame and horror. The funeral director who had built his career on dignity had none left for himself. Colonel Okonkwo walked toward him. The mourners parted to let him pass, sensing that something was about to happen. Ashworth began speaking before Okonkwo reached him. "Colonel, I cannot begin to express how deeply sorry I am. I had no way of knowing who he was. He looked like a vagrant. He smelled like—" Okonkwo held up his hand. "Stop." Ashworth's mouth snapped shut. "I do not want your excuses," Okonkwo said. His voice was calm, almost gentle, which somehow made it worse. "I do not want your explanations. I want you to understand something." He stepped closer, his eyes locked on Ashworth's. "That man you tried to remove from this cemetery walked 47 miles to be here. He had not eaten in 36 hours. He had not slept in 3 days. He came here to say goodbye to his son, and you treated him like garbage. You called him a vagrant and a transient. You threatened him with police. You tried to drag him away from his own child's funeral." Ashworth's face crumpled. "I did not know. How could I have known? That is exactly the point." Okonkwo's voice hardened. "You did not know. You saw a homeless man, and you assumed the worst. You decided that because he did not look the way you thought he should look, he did not deserve to be here. You made a judgment based on appearance, and you were catastrophically wrong." The funeral director's shoulders slumped. "What do you want me to do?" "I want you to remember this day for the rest of your life." Okonkwo did not blink. "I want you to remember what it felt like to realize that the man you were removing was a hero, that the vagrant you were threatening had served his country in ways you cannot imagine, that the transient you dismissed had earned more medals than most soldiers will ever see." Ashworth nodded weakly. "And the next time you see someone who does not fit your idea of what a person should look like," Okonkwo continued, "I want you to remember Command Sergeant Major Raymond Valdez. I want you to remember that every person you meet is fighting a battle you cannot see. That appearance tells you nothing about worth. That the lowest among us might be the greatest heroes of all." He turned and walked away, leaving Ashworth standing alone in the rain. Sergeant First Class Driscoll had not moved either. He stood near the honor guard position, his dress uniform soaked, his face pale. The young sergeant who had accused Raymond of stolen valor, who had declared that real veterans did not end up homeless, looked like a man whose entire worldview had just collapsed. Raymond saw him and began walking in his direction. "Sir, you do not have to," Diane started. Raymond shook his head. "Yes, I do." He crossed the wet grass slowly, his exhausted body protesting every step. The mourners watched in silence as the homeless veteran approached the soldier who had tried to drag him away. Driscoll snapped to attention as Raymond reached him. Tears were streaming down the young man's face, mixing with the rain. "Sir," Driscoll said, his voice breaking, "I do not know I cannot begin what I said to you." Raymond stopped directly in front of him. "Look at me, Sergeant." Driscoll forced himself to meet Raymond's eyes. "You said real veterans do not end up like this." Raymond's voice was quiet but steady. "You were wrong. Real veterans end up exactly like this, more often than anyone wants to admit." Driscoll's face twisted with shame. "I served 24 years, Raymond continued. "I led men into combat in 11 countries. I earned medals that will never be publicly acknowledged. And then I lost my wife, abandoned my son, and spent 6 years sleeping under bridges because I could not face what I had become." He let the words hang in the air. "That is what real veterans look like sometimes. Broken, homeless, lost. It does not mean we did not serve. It does not mean we did not sacrifice. It means the war followed us home, and we did not know how to fight it." Driscoll's knees buckled. He caught himself, but barely. "I am sorry," he whispered. "I am so sorry. I thought I knew what a veteran looked like. I thought I could tell the real ones from the fakes. I was arrogant and ignorant and cruel, and I will never forgive myself for what I said to you." Raymond studied the young man's face. The tears, the shame, the genuine anguish of someone confronting their own failures. "You are young," Raymond said finally. "You have time to learn, time to grow, time to become the kind of soldier who sees people instead of appearances." He reached out and gripped Driscoll's shoulder. "Do not waste that time, Sergeant. Do not spend it hiding from your mistakes. Learn from them. Let them make you better. Because if you do not, you'll end up like me, standing at your son's grave, wishing you had done everything differently." Driscoll nodded, unable to speak. Raymond released his shoulder and turned away. Behind him, Sergeant First Class Cole Driscoll fell to his knees in the wet grass and wept. The rain began to ease as the last of the mourners paid their respects. The clouds remained heavy and gray, but the downpour softened to a gentle mist that clung to Raymond's skin like a second layer of grief. Diane found him standing alone at the edge of the grave. The workers had begun filling it in, each shovelful of earth landing on the casket with a sound that Raymond knew he would hear in his nightmares for the rest of his life. "You should come inside," Diane said softly. "There's a reception in the memorial hall. Food, warmth, people who want to meet you." Raymond did not look away from the grave. "I'm not ready to leave him yet." Diane moved to stand beside him, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. "He would not want you to stand out here in the cold. He would want you to take care of yourself." Raymond almost laughed. The sound that came out was more like a cough. "I have not taken care of myself in 6 years. I do not know if I remember how." "Then let us help you remember." The voice came from behind them. Colonel Okonkwo approached, his uniform still immaculate despite the rain, his bearing still commanding despite the emotion of the day. "Elias asked me to look after you," Okonkwo said, "before his last deployment. He said if anything happened to him and I ever found you, he wanted me to make sure you were okay." Raymond turned to face the colonel. "He asked you to do that." "He asked everyone." Okonkwo's expression softened. Every soldier in his unit knew about his father, knew that he was searching, knew that if they ever encountered a homeless veteran matching your description, they were supposed to contact Elias immediately. He had a whole network of people looking for you. The weight of those words pressed down on Raymond's chest. His son had mobilized an entire unit to find him, had turned his fellow soldiers into search parties, had never stopped believing that his father was out there somewhere, waiting to be found. "I did not deserve that kind of devotion," Raymond said quietly. No, Okonkwo agreed. You did not. But he gave it to you anyway. Because that is who he was. That is the kind of soldier he became. Loyal to the end. Even to the people who had hurt him. Raymond closed his eyes. The guilt was a physical thing, a weight on his shoulders that threatened to drive him into the ground beside his son. I do not know what to do now, he admitted. I have spent 6 years with only one purpose. Survive until tomorrow. Watch Elias from a distance. Disappear before anyone could find me. And now Elias is gone, and I do not know who I am supposed to be. Diane took his hand. Her fingers were cold from the rain, but her grip was firm. You could start by coming home with me, she said. Raymond looked at her. What? I have a spare room. It is small, but it is warm and dry, and there is a bed with clean sheets. She paused. Elias would have wanted me to offer. He would have wanted you to have somewhere to go. I cannot ask you to. You are not asking. I am offering. Diane's voice was steady. You are Elias's father. That makes you family. And family does not sleep under bridges. Raymond did not know how to respond. The offer was so simple, so generous, so completely unexpected that he could not process it. She's right, Okonkwo said. You need somewhere to stay while we figure out the next steps. There are benefits you're entitled to. Via service. Housing assistance. Support programs specifically designed for veterans in your situation. I tried a VA once, Raymond said. They lost my paperwork 3 times. Said they had no record of my service. Okonkwo's jaw tightened. That was before. Now you have me. And I have access to files that the regular VA does not even know exist. Your service record is classified, but it exists. And I will personally ensure that every benefit you are owed is delivered. Raymond looked between Diane and the colonel. 2 people he had never met before today, offering him more help than he had received in 6 years of wandering. Why, he asked. Why would you do this for me? Because Elias loved you, Diane said simply. And I loved Elias. That is enough. Because you serve your country with distinction and deserve better than what you have received, Okonkwo added. And because your son made me promise. And I do not break my promises. Raymond turned back to the grave. The workers had finished filling it in. A mound of fresh earth marked the spot where his son now rested, beside the headstone that bore Sophia's name. He would be with his mother now. Together again, the way it should have been. I need a moment, Raymond said. Just a moment alone with them. Then I will come inside. Diane squeezed his hand and released it. We will be in the memorial hall. Take as long as you need. She walked away, and after a moment, Okonkwo followed. Raymond stood alone between the 2 graves. His wife on one side, his son on the other. The 2 people he had loved most in the world, both gone now, both beyond his reach. He knelt in the wet grass, not caring about the mud soaking through his warm pants. His hands pressed against the fresh earth of Elias's grave, feeling the coldness of it, the finality. Sophia, he whispered, I brought it back to you. I know I was not there when you needed me. I know I failed you both in ways I can never make right. But he is with you now. Take care of him. Take care of our boy. He moved his hand to touch Sophia's headstone. The marble was cold and slick with rain, but he could feel the letters of her name beneath his fingers. I'm going to try, he continued. I'm going to try to be better, to accept help, to stop running. I do not know if I can do it. I do not know if I'm strong enough. But I'm going to try. For him, for you, for the family we were supposed to be. He pressed his forehead against the headstone and let the tears come. Not the racking sobs of earlier, but a quieter grief. A release of something that had been locked inside him for 8 years. When he finally raised his head, the rain had stopped completely. A single beam of sunlight broke through the clouds, illuminating the 2 graves in a golden glow that seemed almost intentional. Raymond stood slowly, his knees aching, his body exhausted beyond measure. He looked at the graves one last time. I will come back, he promised. Every week, every day if I can. I will not disappear again. I will not leave you alone. He touched his chest where the dog tags rested, where the letter was folded against his heart. Still here, he said quietly. Still trying. Then Raymond Valdez turned and walked toward the memorial hall, toward Diane and Okonkwo, toward the warmth and the food and the people who wanted to help him, toward the life his son had wanted him to find. 3 months later, Raymond stood at the window of Diane's spare room and watched the sun rise over Fort Campbell. The room was small, just as she had promised. A single bed with clean sheets. A dresser that held more clothes than he had owned in 6 years. A mirror that showed him a face he was slowly learning to recognize again. He had gained weight. Not much, but enough that his cheekbones no longer jutted like blades beneath his skin. His beard was trimmed now, neat and gray, and his hair was cut short in the military style he had worn for 24 years. The clothes Diane had helped him buy fit properly, and for the first time since Sophia died, he looked like the man he used to be, the man he was trying to become again. His first VA appointment had been 3 days after the funeral. Colonel Okonkwo had accompanied him personally, carrying a folder of documents that made the administrator's eyes go wide. Within a week, Raymond's benefits had been reinstated. Within a month, the back pay had started arriving. 6 years of service-connected disability payments deposited into a bank account Diane had helped him open. He had tried to give her money for rent. She had refused. "You are family," she had said. "Family does not pay rent." Raymond touched the dog tags hanging against his chest. He wore them outside his shirt now, visible to anyone who looked. A statement, an identity, a refusal to hide anymore. The letter was in his pocket. He carried it everywhere, though the paper was growing soft from being read so many times. Elias's words had become a prayer he recited every morning, a reminder of why he was trying, of what he was trying to become. "Find peace, Dad. That is all I ever wanted for you." He was not at peace yet. He did not know if peace was possible for someone who had done the things he had done, failed the people he had failed. But he was trying. Every day he was trying. The nightmares still came. Mogadishu and Kandahar and a dozen other places that existed only in classified files and his own fractured memory. Sophia dying alone while he navigated mountain passes on the other side of the world. Elias's casket descending into the earth. But now, when he woke in the darkness, there was a roof over his head, walls around him, a door he could open to find Diane in the kitchen making coffee, ready to listen if he needed to talk. He did not always need to talk. Sometimes he just needed to know that someone was there. The support group met every Tuesday evening at the VA hospital. Raymond had resisted at first. He had spent decades keeping secrets, compartmentalizing, never showing weakness to anyone. The idea of sitting in a circle and sharing his feelings had seemed absurd. But Okonkwo had insisted, and Raymond had learned, over 50 years of military service, that when a colonel insisted, you followed orders. The first meeting had been agony. He had sat in silence while other veterans shared their stories. Addiction, homelessness, divorce, suicide attempts, the wreckage that war left behind, spread out on display for everyone to see. The second meeting, he had spoken. Just a few words. His name, his branch, his years of service. The third meeting, he had said more. About Sophia, about Elias, about the 6 years he had spent running from everyone who loved him. And the other veterans had listened, had nodded, had understood in a way that civilians never could. Now he went every week, not because Okonkwo ordered him to, but because he needed it, needed the connection, needed to know that he was not alone in his brokenness. He had started volunteering at the homeless shelter on 5th Street, the same shelter that had turned him away twice when the beds were full. The director had been hesitant at first, unsure about having a formerly homeless veteran working with currently homeless veterans. But Raymond had proven himself, had shown up every day, rain or shine, ready to do whatever needed doing. He served meals. He sorted donations. He sat with men who reminded him of himself, men who had served and sacrificed and fallen through the cracks of a system that was supposed to protect them. And he talked, not about his medals or his operations or the classified missions that would never be acknowledged. He talked about failure, about loss, about the years he had wasted hiding from the people who loved him. "I was you," he told them. "I lived under a bridge for 2 years. I drank myself to sleep and woke up and did it again. I convinced myself that I did not deserve help, that I was too broken to be fixed, that the best thing I could do for everyone was disappear." He would pause then, letting the words sink in. I was wrong. And if I can come back from that, so can you. Not everyone listened. Some of them looked at him with the same dead eyes he had seen in his own reflection for 6 years. Some of them walked away before he finished speaking, but some of them stayed. Some of them took the pamphlets he offered, the phone numbers for programs that could help. Some of them showed up at the shelter the next week, ready to take the first step. That was enough. One person at a time. One life at a time. The same way Elias had tried to save the world. Raymond visited the cemetery every Sunday. He would stand between the two graves, his wife and his son, and he would talk to them about his week, about the men he had helped, about the small victories and the setbacks and the constant struggle to be better than he was the day before. He told them about Diane, who had become the daughter he never had, about Okonkwo, who called every week to check on him, about Private Reyes, who had written him a letter apologizing again for not intervening at the funeral, and who now volunteered at the shelter alongside him every Saturday. He told them about the memorial service the Army had held in his honor, a quiet ceremony at Fort Bragg, attended by men whose faces he recognized from missions that had never officially happened. They had presented him with a shadow box containing his medals, the ones that had been locked away in classified files for decades. He had hung it on the wall of his room, not out of pride, but as a reminder of who he had been, and who he was still trying to become. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that healing is possible and that heroes can be found in the most unexpected places, please subscribe to our channel. And share in the comments who the quiet hero in your life might be. Sometimes the people who have given the most are the ones who are struggling the most. A kind word can change everything. Thank you for watching. The sun was fully up now, golden light streaming through the window of Raymond's small room. He could hear Diane moving in the kitchen, the smell of coffee drifting down the hall. He picked up the photograph from his dresser. Not the one of young Elias with the fish. That one was buried with his son, weighted down by a stone that was probably still there. This photograph was different. It showed Raymond and Sophia and Elias on a beach somewhere years ago, before the missions and the absences and the choices that had torn them apart. They were smiling, all three of them, a family, whole and unbroken. He did not remember where the photograph had been taken or who had snapped it, but Diane had found it in Elias's belongings and given it to him. A gift from a son who had never stopped believing his father would come home. Raymond touched the faces in the photograph. His wife, his son, the people he had loved and lost and failed. Still here, he whispered, still trying. Then he set the photograph down, straightened his shirt, and walked out of his room to start another day. The road ahead was long. The healing was slow. The guilt would never fully disappear. But Raymond Valdez was no longer running, no longer hiding, no longer convinced that he deserved to suffer alone. He had found his way home, not to a place, but to a purpose, to a community of broken people trying to put themselves back together, to a family he had not expected and did not deserve, but was learning to accept. Elias had wanted him to find peace. He was not there yet, but for the first time in 8 years, Raymond Valdez believed that peace might be possible, and that was enough to keep trying.